Good afternoon. My name is Mark McGregor, and I'm here to share this next short session with you today. Now, unfortunately, like tens of thousands of people all over the UK, I've been impacted by the lack of hospital appointments through COVID. And would you believe it, that I finally got a long waited for appointment, and it's occurring not just on the same day as I'm here presenting with you, but at exactly the same time as this presentation. So unfortunately, unlike the other sessions through today, I'm not actually going to be here on the live Q&A. However, I've arranged that the organizers can collect any questions that you post in the Q&A, and I will get back to you with answers to those. So please still continue to put your questions in the Q&A. If not, then you're going to see my email. Contact me via email, LinkedIn, or whatever, and I'll do my very best to answer those questions for you. So with my apologies for not being there live and only being with you through the video medium, then let's move on. So just give me a second, and I'm just going to move myself up here out the way, and then we'll get started. Okay, so now I've got myself moved out of the way. New beats old when it comes to enterprise architecture tooling. So this is a presentation that the team at IRM asked me some months ago whether I'd consider doing for them. For anyone that knows, then I've been around in the modeling, the architecture, process side for quite some time, and I figured it would be interesting to do something that was a little different from what I've done before. So this is going to be a pretty data-packed presentation, so relatively few stories from me and an awful lot of data to consume. So let's look at some of that data right off the bat. So what I wanted to do was to just look at saying, today is about combining facts with feelings. So much of our world today, we talk about moving into that data-driven, every decision being made on data. So I figured that it would be a good idea to give you some hard data to work on as you think through about what kind of tooling you need and how to use it. So I've undertaken 2 direct surveys of architects and tool users, one earlier on this year and one that some of you may have participated in over the last few weeks. I've also spent a lot of time reviewing the review websites, having discussions with vendors, lots of end user conversation, and the result of that is I've now gleaned the input from around about 750 tool users. So what I'm going to be sharing with you today are the results of some of that input. Now, obviously, some of the opinion that goes with it is based on, as I say, I've spent 25 years in this market, whether as an industry analyst, where I was involved in something like 1,000 more interactions, or whether it was some of the vendors that I've worked with or for over the years, and you can see some of the logos on there. I would point out that at the time of doing this presentation, at the time of you watching this, then I have no affiliations with any modeling tool vendor. And in fact, I'm working now with Abby, a process mining vendor. So I have no axe to grind. I have no agenda in sharing this information with you. It's purely there for you to make use of and see what you can do. So let's start off with that new versus old. So one of the things that I looked at was, first off, well, what tools are people using and what tools did they consider? So just to give you an idea, here's the graphic that's showing who considered what tools, who purchased what tools, and looking at the overall win ratio. So as you can see right at the very top there, the top 3 tools, Blue Dolphin, RDoc, and Linux, have a greater win ratio. So when we look at the number of people that have considered those tools with the number of people that have purchased them. So then if we look to the bottom, then we can see with people like PlanView, Unicom, etc. These are tools that have been in the market for a great deal longer, and they appear to have significantly lower win rates. Now, I would also point out, and you should be aware of the fact that 30% or so of the people that I've spoken with don't actually use any of these tools, okay? They either use other tools, as I point out here on the slides, there's actually 37 or more different tools, or they're actually using their own homegrown, home-built tools or no tool at all. So although we're looking at the majority, then we're not looking at an overwhelming majority. We're only looking at the 70% that actually stated that they do use a tool and which tools that they looked at. And in doing this, one of the things that I would say is it's quite interesting to ask people what tool they use, and lots of people do it. And you can go and look at the review websites, and you'll see there's 110 users of this or 200 users of that, and it looks fantastic. But if you dig deeper, then you can actually start to say, well, okay, you bought that, but what else did you consider? And that gives us some really interesting information, or at least I think so. So one of the things that I looked at was how do the old tools and the new tools when we look at them head to head. So I've picked an example here on the bottom left of a newer tool. I happen to have picked RDoc, which is, I guess, quite an interesting one in terms of I've had no relationship with RDoc. I've done no work with or for them, so I have no skin in that game. And likewise with Software AG, I've done a few talks many, many years ago, but I have no relationship and nothing there. And what each of these tables show is when someone said that they bought RDoc, then I looked at how many people had also considered BizDesign or considered QualiWare or considered Sparks. And I looked at the number of times both of these tools appeared in the same evaluation and said, well, gee, if RDoc and BizDesign are considered, then it's 50-50 as to whether you choose RDoc or BizDesign. But if RDoc and QualiWare were considered, for example, then 72% of those people actually chose RDoc. And the interesting thing here is that when we look at the newer tool example of RDoc, then what we can see is actually they win more than they lose against most other vendors. Now, if we flip to the other side and we take a little look at Software AG, then using that top example, then we can see that where people considered Evolution and Software AG, 65% of those people actually chose Evolution. And we can see that the same thing goes, they win more than they lose against, they lose in Software AG's case more than they win against RDoc, QualiWare, Mega, BizDesign. And in fact, there are relatively few vendors that they win against more. So I find this a really intriguing one, and I'm hoping that you guys find this is useful and interesting information in helping you work out, well, are we using the right tool, or if we want to change tool, what tools might we want to consider? So then we've got to look at, does the length of use impact the tool choice? So for example, some of those traditional vendors will say, yeah, but we win far more than them. So the other thing that I looked at was saying, well, okay, did people purchase their tools in the last 2 years, or was it over 2 years ago? And what we can see is that in the case of the sample I had, then all of the RDoc, BOC, and Visual Paradigm users, and indeed Magic Draw, all made those decisions less than 2 years ago. Whereas those people that were tending to use things like Provision, iGraphics, Unicom, even the Orbis BizDesign had tended to say that they used or have been using the tool for over 2 years. So this also is an interesting dynamic because obviously with a large installed base, then there's a danger that the older traditional tools are seen as leaders and dominating when actually they did used to lead and they did used to dominate, but they may not be now. One of the things that I didn't collect but is interesting on this account is that people may actually be now switching, and I saw some evidence of it, but nothing to give you hard data, of now switching from older to newer tools. But as I said earlier, I am worried for all of us that more people are saying that they're creating their own tools. Now, that suggests that there's a value challenge with modeling tools, or EA tools generally, but it also suggests that people may not get the understanding and value. And I worry that people aren't getting the most use by creating their own. Sometimes we forget what business we're in. So then I took a little thing that said, well, okay, what are some of the differences that we notice? And this is not a deep dive analysis, but what you can see is that newer tools tend to be cloud native applications, whereas older tools still tend to be desktop or subscription based. They're getting around the SaaS by providing a subscription as opposed to perpetual license. Newer tools place a much greater emphasis on simplicity and ease of use, and this came out from some of the survey. I noticed that a lot of the users of older tools had more to say about the challenges of ease of use and simplicity, because those older tools also have more functionality and complexity. And this is not necessarily a weakness scenario, but just something to watch for, even for the new kids on the block. As they become more mature and start to add more functionality, are they then adding more complexity, and do they become as difficult to use as the traditional tools? The newer tools, and the newer vendors in particular, seem to have much more flexible pricing models, so making it much, much easier to get a broader adoption. The perception is that the older tools are still perceived as being expensive, with high user-based costing, high overheads in maintenance, and a whole bunch of those other things. And then the other area, which I guess has started to become really more prominent over the last 3 or 4 years, is that integration with other tools. So part of a broader tool ecosystem. And the suggestion is that the newer tools are integrating better with those other worlds. And it's harder, not impossible. And many of the older vendors will be saying, hey, we do this link and we do that. Yeah, you have those in place, but you're not perceived as having them in a lightweight, easy to use, flexible manner. Because those older tools are perceived as being slow to evolve. They've got to the stage where they're grinding slower and slower and taking longer and longer to break out and get back and compete on an equal footing with those newer tools. Now, that being said, I want to call out Software AG a little bit here, because there's a lot of work been going on with Software AG over the last 18 months. It is very noticeable with the newer cloud-based applications. And I think that they have made a switch, which could see them coming back to competing with the new kids, but we've yet to see. An area that's always been weak for many EA tools is that of reporting. And many people suggest that they find that the newer tools are noted to be much better at business type reports and queries, rather than just EA for EA type reporting. Another theme and a trend that came out both from the facts and from my own investigations and calls is that older tools are said to be better suited to traditional technical audiences, but they overload business teams. So where we're breaking out to get newer people involved and different groups of people, whether it's the business analysts, whether it's the portfolio managers, whether it's project managers, the newer tools do a much better job of helping to actually address that need. So looking at that issue of pricing, and very much more around perceived pricing and value ideas, one of the questions that I was looking at recently was asking people, well, hey, if you had your modeling tools, so not a broad area, but specifically an EA modeling tool, and you had your integrations with that ecosystem around Jira, Confluence, etc., what do you think that you'd be willing to pay for that? And as you can see, the majority of people still perceive that that should be under 20 euros, dollars, pounds a month, with only a small proportion, just over 10%, suggesting it could be as much as $100 a month, with about 30% sitting there in the middle. So I think this is an interesting dynamic in terms of showing what people think those tools are worth. We're not saying that they're not worth more, but the getting over the perception doesn't appear to be there. And that becomes a real challenge, because let's be honest, at that level of pricing, for the number of enterprise architects there are in the world, it becomes really hard to build a business. So one of the other questions then, what if we said stop pricing by user and look at enterprise licenses with unlimited users? So forget counting how many people, but just make it single price and apply that across the organization. And what we can see here is around about 70% of people actually said, wow, that would be a much better pricing model for me. And then beyond that, if you consider that sort of pricing model, then we ask the question that said, well, okay, what sort of pricing might that be? Now, as you can see, it's a little bit all over the place, with just under 20% saying, well, yeah, maybe up to 100,000 a year. Around 35% saying, hey, yeah, we'd maybe pay up to 50,000 a year. But the majority, 55, 60, coming up 55%, say no more than around 20,000 a year. Now, I haven't got time to go digging into the detail here, but what I can tell you is that that's a little distorted. So the people that were suggesting no more than around 20,000 a year tended to work for small and mid-sized organizations. When I looked at the significant enterprises, those with tens of thousands of employees, or 200, 300, 400 type people in an IT department, they were the people that said, possibly up to 100,000 a year. I could typify those as saying these are the people that may have large installed bases of the traditional tooling. So they're used to paying a lot more. But certainly the larger organizations seem to have a better appreciation of what the value is. By the way, I didn't ask if anyone was willing to pay more than 100,000. I was just looking at some generalizations. So I hope that helps you both look at how you're playing your tool within your organization, maybe how you want to have discussions with potential vendors, and maybe it'll help you in your negotiations with them as to where you want to go. But it's not quite as simple, and we'll talk a little bit more later about some of the complexity on that. So now I want to take just a few minutes to have a little look at the use cases, because one of the things that I always find challenging is when we're looking at EA tools is, what are the use cases? Often we will see people saying, I don't want to spend a lot of money and I'm looking for a long feature set for a very small group of people. And in fact, the group of people are the architects. So shall we say it's architecture for architects. And yet when we look at the reasons that many people were buying tools or successfully buying tools, then we see there were some different drivers. I mean, on the bottom left here, principally, this is research out of Forrester. It's a little old now, but there's no reason to say it's changed significantly. And on the right-hand side is a kind of a mix between some Gartner work and some work that I did myself, so mixing and matching a little bit around there. So one of the questions that I come back to many of you on when you're looking at tools or considering how your tool is used or going to continue to be used or not is, where are you focusing your efforts? Are you looking at how you're using your tools or will be using the tool, for example, on the right-hand side, or the second one down, to enhance decision-making or improve process agility? One of the things that we see when we look at that list is there was nothing there about saying creating architecture for architecture's sake. In fact, there's very little there about the technical aspects. It's more about looking at the business aspects and the business value and the impact that architecture can have on the business. And it's pretty similar on the Forrester list. Right down the bottom, yes, there is the information management for business. But again, although it says here asset focus is really more at technology. The same goes with the project focus, improving quality, reducing risk of application delivery. And a lot of those things are very much aimed again at the business. So question, when we're looking at the value, so why is the perceived value of an EA tool so low? Or why isn't the business willing to spend more on it? Then could it be because we're not actually looking at putting enough effort into doing a business-based use case rather than a technical use case? And I think that becomes a real challenge for tool vendors and tool buyers, users in organizations, to really think hard about the value of the architecture, not the value of the tool per se. I don't think it's any surprise to anyone that at the moment, portfolio management is currently the prime driver for EA tool purchases. Now, I don't want to say specifically application portfolio management because it's broader than that, whether it's portfolios of microservices, which is something that Linux are doing, whether it's the application portfolio management they, RDoC and others have done, whether it's portfolios of projects. There's a whole bunch of things now where actually managing the portfolio of stuff, portfolios of processing would be another example, and an area that many process modeling tools are actually weak on. Them have all sorts of process models, but they won't help you manage the portfolio. So another data point that I really wanted to share was, how long does it take to generate value from EA tooling? And I can't go into lots of depth here, but here's what I found interesting, is that if you take a look at the Orbis, RDoC, Linux, Evolution, and Biz Design, then the majority of their customers say that they are generating value in less than 3 months. It's only when we look at the older style tools, the Software AGs, the Megas, the PlanView, that we see significant drift out into that 6 to 9 and 9 to 12 months. There are outliers there. I mean, we can see jumping out in terms of the red figure on the Linux example, where they've got a 5% taking 12 months plus. I don't know, it's a little surprising. It's an outlier. So it just gives you trends. And one of the things for you to think about when you're looking at adopting an EA tool is, if you think you're going to buy a new tool and it's going to take you 6 to 9 months, then ask the question, are you looking at using the tool in the right way? On the other hand, if you're relying on an older or traditional tool, and you think you're going to get that value inside 3 months, then you could be a little hopeful. So this is very much a generalization. Newer tools appear to meet the need of quick return on investment better than the older tools. But as I said earlier, we need to be careful because, of course, as those new tools mature, then the additional features may cause additional complexity, which may drift some of that time to value creation. So I thought that might be an interesting one for you. Now, I talked about the enterprise license pricing. So this is a slide which I'm sure many of you have seen me use a number of times over the years. I've used it in different scenarios, but I really want you to remember that collaboration and consumption beats creation hands down. One of the challenges I've seen for many, many years is that when EAs look to use EA tools, they're focusing very much on themselves. And so it's, what does the tool do for me? How does it help me do my work? As opposed to, how can what I do help others do their work? So they're focusing, around that capture and collating of information, but actually not looking at saying, actually, it's when the business down here on the left-hand side is actually getting accurately timely information, which enables them to make those decisions, that it's of most value. Oh, and by the way, even for our IT colleagues, it's when every business analyst or every project manager, every solution officer is going back to using that repository of information that we start to get true success. And if we get the whole thing right, then actually we wind up creating that business navigation system. Not everyone's going to get there. Some people are going to see less value in it. Some people are going to make a bigger investment in it. We're going to see it all over the way. But what I do know is that when it comes to being successful in choosing and using your tools, then by focusing on the congregation, you're significantly likely to increase the perceived value of the tooling. You're significantly more likely to continue to get the investment funds you need to keep populating, managing, and maintaining that architecture, and ultimately delivering value. So to summarize, when you're looking at EA tools, I suggest that the leaders in your magic waves may not actually be the leaders, because the criteria that analysts have frequently used is still skewed in the favor of revenue size, for example, on execution and other things, and they're not really a reflection of what's happening more recently. So maybe something needs to change to a rolling 2-year revenue or rolling number of customers in the last 2 years, because you say you have 1,000 customers, but 800 have gone away. Only 200 are active. There's no doubt that the newer vendors have disrupted the market, and I believe that traditional vendors have yet to fully respond. As I mentioned, Software AG have started to do some interesting stuff and are responding. With over 37 tools identified, the market is crowded. Many of the newer vendors' success has come by the fact that they are tightly focused on particular use cases. You could look at some of those newer vendors, go out with your traditional list of features that you're looking at and find they don't even support them. Now, you can say that that's a weak tool, or you can say they don't support them because actually it doesn't fit for delivering the business value that they're focused on. There's no getting away from the fact that the traditional vendors still offer the broadest set of capabilities, but that's also what makes them complex. So in closing this, I want to share a little prediction with you, and that's that I predict that within 3 years, we'll see the death of the old school monolithic EA tool with everything vertically integrated. I think that EA tooling will actually be replaced by the EA ecosystem with micro tools plugged together, so that you might have modeling from one vendor, you might have reporting from somewhere else, you might plug portfolio management, etc. And you're going to plug those pieces together in a more loosely coupled way so that you can deliver just the functionality that a particular group of people need, when they need it, in the way that they need it, without overloading them with functionality they don't need. Now, of course, the whole thing will still need to be underpinned by a common central repository that's easily accessible for all of those groups. So that was my fast track through the new versus old when it comes to EA tooling. There's a couple of links that I've shared with you where I've done a couple of other similar-ish presentations around the changes in EA, and you're more than welcome to take a look at those. On the survey results, I'm currently working on and putting together a short survey report based on that. If you'd like a copy of that, then please feel free to email me. And as I say, if you email me any questions that you have, or I'll get the questions captured from the guys, then that's it from me. So enjoy the rest of the conference. Thanks for your attention, and hopefully we'll all get the chance to see each other again in person very soon.